I should have known better than to say yes to Marcus's camping invitation. 3 months of ignored group texts should have been hint enough that I wasn't exactly dying to reconnect with the old college crew. But there's something about a forwarded email with "epic weekend getaway" in the subject line that makes you feel obligated to prove you're not completely antisocial. Or maybe it was the fact that I'd been working 60-hour weeks for the past year and my therapist kept suggesting I reconnect with people from happier times. Happier times, right. The drive up to Pine Ridge took 4 hours through winding mountain roads that made my 10-year-old Honda wheeze like an asthmatic chain smoker. I'd forgotten how much I hated road trips until I was 2 hours into this one, nursing lukewarm gas station coffee and wondering if it was too late to fake a family emergency. When I finally pulled into the campground, the sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting everything in that golden hour light that makes even the most mundane moments look like an indie film poster. The guys had claimed a cluster of campsites near the lake, and I could hear them before I saw them, Marcus's booming laugh cutting through the evening air like a foghorn. "Danny," he called out as I climbed out of my car, arms already spread wide for one of those aggressive bear hugs that had always made me slightly uncomfortable. "I can't believe you actually came, man. When's the last time we saw you? Sarah's wedding?" "Something like that," I said, accepting the hug and immediately regretting not bringing stronger deodorant. Marcus still wore the same cologne he'd worn in college, something that smelled like a nightclub mixed with a pine forest. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone." Well, reintroduce, I guess. I followed him toward the cluster of tents, recognizing faces I hadn't seen in years. There was Kevin, who'd somehow gotten even skinnier since graduation and was now apparently really into CrossFit, based on the neon tank top and the way he kept flexing while setting up his camp chair. Sarah's ex-boyfriend Tom was there too, which seemed like an odd choice for a bros weekend, but I wasn't going to be the one to bring up old drama. And then I saw him. Jake Morrison was crouched next to a massive tent, wrestling with what appeared to be a tangle of guy lines and stakes. His dark hair was longer than I remembered, curling slightly at the edges where it met his collar, and he'd filled out since college, broader shoulders, more defined arms visible beneath his rolled-up flannel sleeves. He looked up as Marcus called his name, squinting against the fading sunlight, and for a moment our eyes met across the campsite. "Hey, Danny," he said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his jeans. His voice was the same, deep with that slight rasp that had always made him sound like he'd just woken up, even at 2 in the afternoon. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Likewise," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. The truth was, I'd specifically avoided asking Marcus who else was coming, partly because I didn't want to deal with the social anxiety of planning conversations in advance, and partly because I'd been hoping certain people wouldn't be there. Jake Morrison had been one of those people. It wasn't that I actively disliked him. Well, okay, maybe I did a little. He'd always been the kind of guy who dominated every room he walked into, not through any particular talent or charm, but through sheer volume and confidence. The kind of person who told stories that went on too long and always ended with him as the hero. In college, he'd been the self-appointed organizer of every party, every road trip, every group hangout, and somehow everyone just went along with it. But it was more than that. There had always been something about Jake that set my teeth on edge, something I could never quite articulate. Maybe it was the way he'd flirt with everyone, guys and girls alike, then laugh it off with some variation of, "Don't worry, I'm straight as hell," whenever anyone called him on it. Like being gay was some kind of disease you could catch from too much eye contact. "Need any help with that?" I asked, nodding toward his tent, which looked like it was in the middle of a very slow-motion collapse. "Nah, I got it," he said, then immediately cursed as one of the poles snapped back and nearly took out his eye. "Actually, yeah, if you could just hold this corner." I dropped my backpack and moved to help him, our fingers brushing briefly as I took hold of the tent fabric. His hands were warm and slightly rough, with calluses I didn't remember from college, working hands. "Thanks," he said, not looking at me as we worked to get the tent properly staked down. "This thing's a piece of shit, but it was the only one big enough at the rental place." "How big is it?" I asked, then immediately regretted the question when he grinned. Big enough for two, if you don't mind getting cozy, he said, and I felt heat creep up my neck. Why, you need somewhere to crash? I heard Marcus say something about them being short on tents. I looked around the campsite, counting the shelters for the first time. 7 guys, but only 6 tents. The math was simple and deeply unfortunate. I can sleep in my car, I said quickly. Don't be ridiculous, it's supposed to drop into the 30s tonight. Jake straightened up, brushing dirt off his knees. I don't snore if that's what you're worried about. I'm not worried, I said, which was a lie. Just don't want to impose. It's not an imposition. Besides, he added with that trademark grin that had gotten him out of trouble for as long as I'd known him, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, I thought, but I just nodded and went to get my gear. The next few hours passed in a blur of camp setup, beer drinking, and the kind of aggressively nostalgic conversation that happens when people who used to know each other well try to pretend they still do. We built a fire as the sun disappeared completely, and Marcus broke out his portable speaker to play a playlist that seemed specifically designed to transport us all back to 2018. I found myself sitting across the fire from Jake, watching him through the flames as he told some story about a disastrous client meeting at his marketing job. He gestured with his beer bottle, animated and confident, and I realized that while his fundamental personality hadn't changed much, there was something different about him. Less performative, maybe, more comfortable in his own skin. Or maybe I was just older and more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. Remember that time Jake convinced us all to go cliff jumping at Devil's Lake? Kevin was saying, his voice slightly slurred from the beer. And then he was the last one to actually jump because he was checking the water depth? I was being responsible, Jake protested, but he was laughing. Unlike the rest of you idiots who just hurled yourselves off a 20-foot cliff without thinking. You stood up there for like 10 minutes, Tom added. We thought you'd chickened out. I don't chicken out, Jake said, and there was something in his voice, a slight edge that made me look up from my beer. I just think things through. The conversation moved on, but I kept watching Jake's face in the firelight, noting the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. There had been more to that cliff-jumping story, I realized. Something the others had missed or forgotten. By 11, the temperature had dropped enough that we could see our breath in the firelight, and people started talking about heading to bed. I helped clean up the remnants of our dinner, hot dogs and s'mores, because apparently we were all 12 years old, and tried not to think about the fact that I'd be spending the night in close quarters with Jake Morrison. You guys need anything else before we call it a night? Marcus asked, already halfway to his tent. Extra blankets, flashlights, condoms? He grinned at his own joke, and I felt my stomach twist with familiar anxiety. We're good, Jake said easily. Danny's a low-maintenance camping partner, aren't you, Danny? I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. The truth was, I hadn't been camping since I was a kid, and I'd forgotten how the darkness seemed to press in around you once you left the safety of the fire. The mountain air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and something earthier, damp soil maybe, or decomposing leaves. Jake's tent was set up slightly apart from the others, closer to the tree line. As we approached it, I could hear the quiet sounds of the other guys settling in for the night. The rustle of sleeping bags, muffled conversations, someone's phone playing music at low volume. Home sweet home, Jake said, unzipping the tent flap and crawling inside. I followed, immediately struck by how much smaller the space felt than it had looked from the outside. The tent was designed for 2 people, technically, but 2 people apparently meant 2 people who really enjoy each other's company and don't mind sharing personal space. There was maybe 18 inches between our sleeping bags, and when Jake sat up to arrange his gear, his shoulder brushed against mine. Sorry, he said, not moving away immediately. Cozy, right? Yeah, I managed, hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from his body. Cozy. We worked in relative silence to get our sleeping areas set up, a careful dance of elbows and knees in the confined space. Jake had brought an actual camping pillow in a sleeping bag that looked like it cost more than my car payment, while I was making do with a rolled-up hoodie and a bag I'd borrowed from my sister's closet. Don't worry, I don't bite. Jake said, catching me eyeing the narrow space between our sleeping arrangements. Not worried, just don't snore on me, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. I'm straight, not rabid, he said with a laugh, then seemed to catch himself, his expression shifting slightly. I mean, I know what you meant, I said quickly, not wanting to dwell on the familiar phrase or the way it had always rubbed me wrong. The silence that followed was awkward, filled with the rustle of sleeping bags and the distant sound of an owl hooting somewhere in the trees. Jake busied himself with arranging his pillow, and I focused intently on the zipper of my sleeping bag, both of us suddenly hyper-aware of the casual intimacy the situation demanded. Here, Jake said, noticing me struggling with the ancient zipper. Let me see that. His fingers brushed mine as he took the bag, and I caught a whiff of his scent. Deodorant and something else, something distinctly him that I remembered from college. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was unsettling in the way that familiar smells could transport you back to places you thought you'd moved on from. There, he said, working the zipper free. Good as new. Well, as new as something from 1987 can be. It's vintage, I said, accepting the bag back from him. Character building. Is that what we're calling it? He grinned and settled into his own sleeping bag, the movement bringing him closer to me in the confined space. Jake reached over to turn off the battery-powered lantern he'd hung from the roof of the tent, and suddenly we were plunged into darkness so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The absence of light was disorienting, making me hyper-aware of every sound. Jake's breathing beside me, the whisper of fabric as he shifted in his sleeping bag, the distant murmur of voices from the other tents. Christ, I muttered, immediately unsettled by the complete darkness. Takes some getting used to. Jake's voice came from beside me, closer than I'd expected. No light pollution up here. On a clear night, you can see the Milky Way. Is it clear tonight? Hard to tell with the cloud cover. Might clear up later. I lay there in the darkness, trying to adjust to the sensory deprivation. It wasn't the first time I'd been near Jake. We'd shared plenty of spaces in college, sat next to each other in classes, crowded into cars for road trips. But something about the dark, the silence, the shared breath in this small intimate space made it feel different, more immediate, more dangerous. I could hear him settling into his sleeping bag, the quiet rustle of fabric, the soft sigh he made as he found a comfortable position. We were lying on our backs, separated by maybe 2 feet of space that felt both vast and negligible in the darkness. Danny? Jake's voice was quiet, almost tentative. Yeah? Thanks for helping with the tent earlier, and for, agreeing to share the space. I know we were never really close in school. I turned my head toward the sound of his voice, though I couldn't see anything in the darkness. It's fine, I said. We're all adults here. Are we, though? He asked, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Sometimes I feel like I'm still 22 and pretending I know what I'm doing. The admission surprised me. The Jake Morrison I remembered from college had never admitted uncertainty about anything. I think everyone feels that way sometimes, I said. Even you? Especially me. He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him thinking, could almost hear the gears turning in his head. You always seem so put together, he said finally. Like you had it all figured out while the rest of us were just winging it. Trust me, I was winging it too. I just got good at hiding it. Hiding what? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I'd revealed more than I'd intended. In the darkness, with the safety of not being able to see his face or have him see mine, the words had come easier. Everything, I said finally. What I wanted, who I was, what I was afraid of. What were you afraid of? I thought about how to answer that without giving away too much. The truth was complicated. I'd been afraid of a lot of things in college. Afraid of not being smart enough, afraid of not fitting in, afraid of wanting things I wasn't supposed to want. Being seen, I said finally. Really seen, not just the version of myself I thought people wanted. And now? Now I'm older and supposedly wiser, but I still don't know if I'm any braver. Jake shifted beside me, and suddenly I felt the warmth of his shoulder pressing against mine through our sleeping bags. The contact was slight, almost accidental, but neither of us moved away from it. I don't think you give yourself enough credit, he said quietly. What do you mean? I mean, you're here, aren't you? You could have stayed home, could have made some excuse about work or whatever, but you're here, sharing a tent with someone you barely tolerate, being honest about being afraid. That seems pretty brave to me. The warmth of his shoulder against mine was distracting, making it hard to think clearly. It was such a small point of contact, but in the darkness and silence of the tent it felt significant. I don't barely tolerate you, I said. No? No, I never knew how to read you. You were always so loud, so confident. It was hard to tell what was real and what was performance. Most of it was performance, he said quietly. The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. I felt him take a deep breath as if steeling himself for something. Can I tell you something? He asked. Sure. I used to joke about being straight as hell all the time. You remember that? I remember. I did that mostly so no one would ask what I actually was. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. In the darkness, I could feel the weight of his confessions settling around us, changing the very air we were breathing. Jake, I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I know, he said quickly. I know it's fucked up, considering how much time I spent making those jokes. But every time someone would tease me about flirting with guys, every time someone would make some comment about my sexuality, I'd panic, so I'd overcompensate. What were you overcompensating for? The question came out barely above a whisper, and I felt him turn slightly toward me in the darkness. Our shoulders were still touching, but now I could feel more of his warmth, could sense him facing me even though I couldn't see him. For the fact that I wasn't sure, he said. For the fact that when I looked at you across a room, I felt something I wasn't supposed to feel. For the fact that sometimes when I was making out with some girl at a party, I'd be thinking about what it would be like to kiss you instead. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it in the quiet tent. This was dangerous territory, the kind of conversation that couldn't be taken back once you'd had it. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I'm tired of pretending. Because I'm 30 years old and I still don't know who I am, but I know I'm tired of running from it. He paused and I could feel him gathering courage. And because you're the only person who ever looked at me like you could see through the bullshit. What did you think I saw? Someone who was scared. Someone who was performing so hard he'd forgotten who he was underneath it all. The honesty in his voice was overwhelming. This wasn't the Jake Morrison who dominated every conversation in college, who'd told stories that went on too long. This was someone else entirely, someone vulnerable and uncertain and achingly real. I did see that, I admitted. I just didn't know what to do with it. And now? Now I'm wondering how long you've been carrying this around. Years, he said simply. Since college, maybe longer. We lay there in the darkness, our shoulders still touching, both of us breathing carefully. The weight of his confessions settled between us, and I found myself reassessing every interaction we'd ever had, every joke he'd made, every time he'd overcompensated with aggressive heterosexuality. Danny? Jake's voice was soft, tentative. Yeah? Are you freaked out? I don't know, I said honestly. I'm processing. Take all the time you need. But even as he said it, I could feel the tension in his body, the way he was holding himself very still, waiting for my reaction. In the darkness, without the distraction of visual cues, I was hyper-aware of every small sound, every shift in his breathing. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. What do you want from me? Right now, I mean. What are you hoping I'll say? He was quiet for so long I started to wonder if he'd fallen asleep. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to tell me I'm not crazy. I want you to tell me that you felt it too, whatever it was between us in college. I want you to tell me it's not too late to figure out what that means. His words hung in the air between us, vulnerable and honest and terrifying in their implications. I thought about how to respond, about what I was willing to admit in the safety of this dark tent. "You're not crazy," I said finally. "And the rest?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something I couldn't take back. "I felt it too," I said. "Whatever it was, I felt it too." I heard his intake of breath, felt some of the tension leave his body. "Really? Really? Why do you think I avoided you so much? It was easier than dealing with what I felt when I was around you." "What did you feel?" "Confused, frustrated, like I was standing too close to something dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Dangerous like I might do something stupid. Like I might let myself want something I couldn't have." "What if you could have it?" The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and fear in equal measure. Outside the tent, I could hear the wind picking up in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the first drops of rain began to tap against the tent fabric. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've spent so many years not thinking about it that I don't know how to think about it." "Maybe you don't have to think about it right now. Maybe you can just feel it." The rain was getting heavier, drumming against the tent with increasing intensity. The sound was soothing, creating a cocoon around us that made the rest of the world feel very far away. "Jake," I said quietly. "Yeah? I'm glad you told me. About the jokes, about what you were hiding. It helps me understand." "Understand what?" "Why it always felt like there was something more going on. Why I could never quite shake the feeling that you were performing for everyone but looking at me." "I was looking at you," he admitted. "Probably more than I should have been." "I was looking at you too." The rain continued to fall, and in the rhythmic sound of water against canvas, I felt something settling between us. Not resolution exactly, but a kind of recognition. Like we were finally seeing each other clearly after years of looking through distorted glass. I felt Jake shift beside me, turning more fully toward me in the narrow space. The movement brought us closer together, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face, warm and steady. "Danny?" His voice was barely audible above the rain. "Yeah? Are you awake?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question, given that we'd been talking for the past hour, but something in his tone made me understand that he was really asking something else, whether I was present, whether I was with him in this moment of honesty and possibility. "Yeah," I said softly. "I'm awake." There was a pause, filled with the sound of rain and the weight of everything we'd just shared. Then Jake spoke again, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear him. "What if I told you I don't think I ever was?" The words hit me like lightning, sudden and illuminating and dangerous. I knew exactly what he meant. Not awake to the rain, not awake to the moment, but awake to himself, awake to the truth he'd been running from for years. "Straight?" I whispered. "Yeah." The single word hung between us in the darkness, heavy with implication and possibility and the promise of everything changing. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the mountain clean and carrying away the debris of old pretenses. I lay there in the darkness, feeling the warmth of Jake's body beside me, listening to the sound of his careful breathing, and knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Part 2. The silence that followed his whispered confession stretched between us like a held breath. "What if I told you I don't think I ever was?" The words hung in the darkness, raw and vulnerable, and I felt something fundamental shift in the space around us, not just between us, but in the very air we were breathing. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to someone dismantling 8 years of carefully constructed identity in a single sentence? How do you hold space for that kind of revelation without making it about yourself? Without rushing to fill the quiet with reassurance or questions or anything that might break the fragile trust he'd just offered? So I said nothing. Just lay there in the darkness, our shoulders still touching, listening to the rain tap against the tent fabric and feeling the weight of his honesty settle around us like a blanket. Minutes passed. Maybe 5, maybe 15. Time had taken on a different quality in the tent, measured not in clock ticks but in heartbeats and breath cycles, and the gradual shift from night toward dawn. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, no longer the driving storm that had started when we first lay down together, but steady and rhythmic, like the mountain itself was breathing. "I'm sorry," Jake said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have." "Don't," I said, cutting him off before he could take it back. "Don't apologize. Not for that. It's just, I've never said it out loud before, to anyone. Not even to yourself." A pause. "Especially not to myself." I turned my head toward him in the darkness, wishing I could see his face, read whatever was happening behind his eyes. The tent was too dark, though, the rain clouds blocking what little starlight might have filtered through the fabric. "Can I started, then stopped, unsure if I was about to overstep. "What?" "Can I turn on the flashlight? I want to see you." He was quiet for so long I thought he might say no, then, "Okay." I reached across him carefully, my arm brushing his chest as I felt around for the small LED flashlight I'd seen him hang from the tent's ceiling earlier. My fingers found it, and I switched it on to its lowest setting, casting a soft circle of light that illuminated our faces and little else. What I saw made my chest tighten. Jake's eyes were red-rimmed, not with tears exactly, but with the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. His hair was disheveled from lying down, curling at odd angles, and there was a vulnerability in his expression I'd never seen before, like someone had carefully peeled away a layer of armor he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Hi," I said softly. "Hi." We looked at each other in the gentle light, neither of us speaking. There was something almost ceremonial about the moment, like we were seeing each other clearly for the first time. Not the versions of ourselves we'd performed in college, not the careful personas we'd maintained around the campfire earlier that evening, but something truer and more fundamental. "You look tired," I said. "I am tired." He reached up and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I've been tired for a long time, I think." "From what?" "From pretending, from always talking too loud, acting like I had it all figured out." He let his hand fall back to his side. "Truth is, I've never known what I wanted, not really. Until maybe just now." The honesty in his voice was almost overwhelming. This wasn't the Jake Morrison who'd dominated every room in college, who'd told stories that went on too long and always ended with him as the hero. This was someone else entirely, someone quieter, more uncertain, but infinitely more real. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the flashlight's glow. "I want us to stop running from this," he said. "From you, from whatever this is between us." "You've been running from me?" "For 8 years, maybe longer." He shifted slightly, turning more fully toward me. "Every time Marcus invited you to something and you said no, I was relieved, because I knew if you were there, I'd spend the whole time trying not to look at you, trying not to think about what it would feel like to touch you. And when I did show up to things, I talked louder, told more stories, made more jokes about being straight." He gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Real mature, right? We were kids. We're not kids now." "No," I agreed. "We're not." The rain continued its gentle percussion above us, and in the soft light of the flashlight, I could see Jake's chest rising and falling with careful, measured breaths. He was trying to stay calm, I realized, trying to hold himself together while his world rearranged itself around this new truth he'd spoken into existence. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I don't know. I don't think I've been okay for a while." He paused. "But I think maybe I could be, if I stopped pretending." "Pretending what?" "That I don't think about you when I'm falling asleep. That I don't wonder what your voice sounds like first thing in the morning. That I don't want to know what makes you laugh, really laugh, not just the polite laugh you do when someone tells a bad joke." Each confession hit me like a small shock, rearranging my understanding of our shared history. All those years I'd thought he barely tolerated my presence. He'd been carrying this secret want, this careful attention to details I'd never known he noticed. "I think about you too," I said quietly. "More than I should, probably." "What do you think about?" It was my turn to feel exposed, to consider how much truth I was willing to offer in return for his honesty. I think about what you'd be like if you weren't performing all the time, I said. I think about whether the person you are when you're alone is anything like the person you are right now. And what do you think about who I am right now? I studied his face in the flashlight's glow, taking in the uncertainty in his eyes, the way he was holding himself very still, like he was afraid any movement might shatter whatever fragile thing we were building between us. I think you're beautiful, I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess them. I think you're scared and honest and nothing like the person I thought I knew in college. Is that good or bad? It's everything. We fell into silence again, but it was different now. Not the careful quiet of earlier, but something deeper and more settled, like we'd both been holding our breath for years and could finally exhale. Danny? Jake's voice was soft, tentative. Yeah? Are you going to pretend this didn't happen in the morning, when we have to go back out there and be around everyone else? The question caught me off guard with its raw vulnerability. Here was someone who'd spent years building walls around himself, and he was asking me not to tear them down just to rebuild them in the morning light. No, I said firmly. I don't think I could. Promise? Promise. He exhaled slowly, and I saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. Good, he said, because I don't think I can go back to pretending I don't care about you. You won't have to. The flashlight was starting to dim, its batteries running low, but neither of us moved to turn it off. In the fading light, Jake looked young and uncertain, stripped of all the confidence that had defined him for as long as I'd known him. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. What happens now? I mean, after this weekend, when we go back to our regular lives? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a complete answer to. The practical part of my brain, the part that had spent years managing expectations and avoiding disappointment, wanted to hedge, to keep things vague and non-committal. But looking at Jake in the dying light, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression, I knew he deserved better than careful deflection. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'd like to find out. That's not very specific. Do you need it to be specific right now? He considered this, his fingers picking at the edge of his sleeping bag. No, he said finally. I guess I've never done this before, the not knowing part. What do you mean? I mean, I've always had a plan, always known what came next. College, then job, then promotion, then marriage to some nice girl who'd fit into the life I thought I was supposed to want. He paused. This doesn't fit into any plan I've ever made. Maybe that's okay. Maybe plans are overrated. Says the guy who probably has his whole life mapped out in color-coded spreadsheets. I laughed, surprised by how well he'd read me. Okay, maybe I'm not the best person to give advice about spontaneity, I admitted. But I know what it feels like to plan your whole life around avoiding the thing you actually want. Is that what you've been doing? Among other things. The flashlight finally gave up, plunging us back into darkness. But instead of feeling disorienting like it had earlier, the darkness now felt intimate, protective. A space where we could exist without having to perform or pretend or worry about what our faces might be giving away. Jake? Can I tell you something? Yeah. All the years I spent trying not to look at you too long, trying not to read too much into every interaction we had, and now here you are looking at me like I'm the only steady thing in the room. I felt him shift beside me, and then his hand was finding mine in the darkness, our fingers threading together with an ease that should have been surprising but somehow wasn't. You are the only steady thing in the room, he said quietly. You always have been. What do you mean? I mean, even when I was at my most obnoxious, when I was talking too loud and taking up too much space, you never played along with the performance. You just watched, like you were waiting for me to stop bullshitting and say something real. I was. I know. That's what scared me. His thumb was tracing small circles on the back of my hand, and the simple contact was sending warmth spreading up my arm and settling in my chest. What scares you now? I asked. That I'll mess this up, That I'll go back to being the person who talks too loud because he doesn't know how to be quiet with someone. That I'll disappoint you. You won't disappoint me. How can you be sure? Because the person you are right now in this tent talking to me like this is who I've been waiting to meet. This is who I was looking for all those times I was watching you. He was quiet for a long time, his thumb still moving in those gentle circles against my skin. I don't know how to be this. He said he was straight as hell, but that night in the tent proved otherwise. Gay love story, Twid.